Well done for making it this far. Now we're going on to module 3, grammar. So in this module, you'll learn all the grammar you need for every single question type in task 1. So because of that, we will be covering quite a lot of content. So I really need you to be alert and focused and take breaks when you need them. So in this module, you will learn what tense to use for different time periods, how to join and link changes together more smoothly, how to use the present passive and complex linkers for process questions, how to use the present perfect passive and future simple passive for maps, what prepositions to use to describe graphs and tables, how to write different comparative sentences and modify them, how to rank information in a chart using key expressions, how to write different complex sentences, how to write and use relative clauses, and lastly, how to use punctuation correctly. So as you can see, we have a lot of things to cover. So make sure you get your cup of tea or coffee ready before we start. So first of all, we'll move on to tenses. So tenses are the basics of any writing. And if you don't get this right, then your whole report will not really make sense. So when it comes to any graph, chart, table or map, you'll normally see dates, and this tells you what tense to use. For instance, if there is no date, some of them actually don't have a date whatsoever, then in that case you can assume it's in the present and you can use the present simple. If, however, there is a date and this time it's 1 year in the past, then in that case the past simple is the most appropriate tense to use. So for example, have a look at these two graphs. What tense do you think we will need to use for this one and for this one? So hopefully you should have said past simple, because this is in 1 year, which is 2013, and this has no date whatsoever, so it's the present simple. You sometimes also get charts where you have to use more than one tense. So for instance, if you have several years in the past, then you use the past simple and past perfect. So you have more than 1 year in the past. And it could also be where you have dates from the past all the way to the future. And then in this case, you use a mix of past and future tense. Have a look at these new graphs. So take a pause here and then just think about what tense you would use for each one. So for Condax, this graph, Condax exports and turnover, you should have said past simple and future tense, because it's got the dates are 2000, 2010 and 2020. So it's a mix of past and future. For the price of Bitcoin, it should be past simple and past perfect, because it starts in 2010 and goes all the way to 2017, and all of them are in the past. So let's review all the tenses quickly. I'm not going to go into detail, I'm just going to gloss over them quickly for you. So I'm going to use an example of one of the most well-known dishes in the UK, and that's the fish and chips. So have a look at this table for me. It's got the 3 main tenses in English, and it's got all the different aspects it has. So if we start off with past simple, now obviously this is used for actions that have happened, they are completed and are in the past. And then we've got past continuous, where one action has been interrupted by another, or where you have 2 actions happening at the same time. So for example, I was eating fish and chips yesterday when I got sick. And then we've got past perfect, which is used when you're talking about an action that happened before another one. So for example, I had eaten some of the fish and chips when I realized it was not cooked properly. So the first action that happened is that she ate the fish and chips, and then after that she realized that it wasn't cooked properly. And then we've got the present simple, which is obviously used for habits and routines and facts. And then present continuous, which is used for actions happening now or for future arrangements, and present perfect for any events that have started in the past and haven't finished, so they're carrying on into the present. Then they've got the future simple for actions happening in the future, and the future continuous is used when you want to say what you will be doing at a certain time in the future. So in this case, I will be having fish and chips this time next week. And the future perfect simple is when you want to say what you would have done at a certain time in the future. So I will have had fish and chips by this time next week. So for a mixed tense exercise, go to page 24. Now we'll go straight into those graphs that I showed you earlier, and this one is the present simple one. I want you to pause here and go to page 26 on your ebook and write an introduction for me. So paraphrase the question here, the bold bit, and then I want you to just write one paragraph where you mention the most and the least expensive cities, as well as any cities that are similar. Let's have a look at the answers. So this is the introduction. This chart depicts data on the typical cost of a 3-bed house in 7 different cities in Britain. And then the paragraph 1 is London and Cambridge have the most expensive houses, whilst Birmingham has the least. So as you can see, London and Cambridge are the most expensive, and Birmingham over here is the least expensive. And then we've got the cost of homes in Edinburgh and Portsmouth are just about the same. So here's Portsmouth and then here's Edinburgh, and they're both the same price. So one thing you need to keep in mind with present simple is your subject-verb agreement. Now, I've seen students make this mistake quite a lot. They tend to, for instance, forget to add the S, ES or IES when it's singular subjects. And they tend to sometimes mix has and have as well. So make sure when it's singular subject, so it's one subject, you use the be verb is, has, or you add s, es or ies to the other verbs. If it's a plural subject, so it's more than one subject, then you need to use are and have, and there is no s, es or ies, so there is no change to the verb at all. So for example, here London and Cambridge are 2 subjects, so you would use have because it's plural. And then here you've got Birmingham, because it's singular, I'm using has. So make sure you keep this in mind when you're writing in the present simple. Let's move on to past simple now. Pause here again and write the introduction for me, as well as one paragraph where you mention the most and least produced product. Try to also mention any that are similar and include some figures. So study the graph first, take some time out to look at it properly, and then write those 2 paragraphs for me. Let's have a look at the answers. So this chart illustrates the number of fair trade farmers and workers who harvested tea, bananas and other products in 2013. Tea had the highest ratio of farmers and workers at approximately 175,000 and 130,000 respectively. However, bananas had the least production, whilst other products fluctuated between roughly 80,000 farmers and 30,000 workers. As you can see, the main verbs are in the past, had, and fluctuated, and I've also used actual figures from the chart. I hope you've done that too. Moving on to past simple and past perfect. So remember, past simple is used for actions that have happened in the past or completed, and past perfect is used when one action happened before another one. And some of the key words that are used with past perfect are before, until, till, and when. So when you're writing in the past perfect, this is the formula that you should be following. So the first action should be in past perfect, and then the second action should be in simple past. So if you look at this chart, it's looking at the price of Bitcoin, and what I want you to do is pause here again and paraphrase the question to write your introduction, and then analyze this chart for me so you can describe all the changes that you can see from 2010 to 2017. Try to use at least one sentence in the past perfect too. Let's have a look at what I wrote. This graph displays how much Bitcoin cost over a 17-year period. Before 2013, the price of Bitcoin had been constant at almost $0, after which it surged remarkably to about $850 in the subsequent year. This was followed by a dramatic decline of $550 in 2015 before it recovered and then soared to its highest price at almost $960 per Bitcoin. As you can see, I've used one sentence in the past perfect, which is this one over here. And then the rest of the sentences are in the past simple. So it's actually more common to use past simple, but try to use at least one sentence or two sentences in the past perfect. The other thing that I want to point out to you are complex joiners. So complex joiners are these ones. Oops, let me go to the highlighter. So it's these ones, after which, and another one is here, before, and the last one is here, and then. So they are what we call complex joiners, meaning they're joining two different changes together. And also they're creating a complex sentence at the same time. So they're amazing to use in task 1, because what you're essentially doing is that you're connecting your changes together and creating a complex sentence at the same time. So this will be dealt with in more detail in the next lesson. And lastly, for the last chart that we'll be looking at is mixed past and future tense. And like I said, this is for charts where you've got past years and projections to the future, in which case you have to use a mix of past tenses and future. So if you have a look at this chart, what I want you to do is just pause here, look at it, and then decide what tenses specifically you should use. Let's have a look at the answers. So past simple, future simple, and future perfect. Now there are two ways you can talk about the future. One is to use the present passive, and the second one is to use the future tense. So if we look at the present passive, you can use this with specific verbs, and these are expected, set, predicted, estimated, anticipated, projected, and likely. So you have to use it with these verbs only, and this is because these verbs have a future meaning. And the other way is to use the future simple and the future perfect. When it comes to projections, I would recommend you use a mix of present passive and future simple and future perfect. So if we have a look at machinery, let's have a look at machinery. So machinery in 2020 is expected to reach about £11 million in sales. If we look at organic chemical is set to reach approximately £9 million by 2020. So there you go. So you can use these verbs in the present passive to show a future meaning. You can also use the future simple. So you can simply say machinery will reach around £11 million in sales by 2020, or the future perfect and say that organic chemical will have reached approximately £9 million by 2020. So it's time for you to practice. What I want you to do is have a look at plastics. So here you go, have a look at this one, and I want you to write what plastics is expected to be in 2020 in 3 different ways. 1, I want you to write it using the present passive. 2, I want you, the second one in the future simple, and then the third one in the future perfect. So it's the same sentence, you're just writing it in 3 different ways. Okay, so pause here and then play again when you're ready. So let's have a look at the answers. Plastics is expected to decline considerably by 2020. Plastics will decline considerably by 2020. Or plastics will have declined considerably by 2020. So you can see all these sentences more or less have the same meaning, which is in the future, what's going to happen in the future by 2020. Another thing that I want to point out is that when you're using present passive, after the main verbs expected, set and predicted and so on, the next one has to be verb 1. So you're using the infinitive basically, yeah? So do not use past tense here or any other one. So just use the infinitive, which is in this case to decline, to reach, etc. It's time to practice again. Pause here and write the introduction for me, as well as 2 paragraphs. So in your second paragraph, let me choose the highlighter. In your second paragraph, you're grouping 2000 and 2010 together. So you're grouping these 2 together. And then in your third paragraph, you are writing about 2020 separately. And another thing I also want you to keep in mind is to use figures. So you really need to get into the habit of using actual figures. So make sure you quote how much the sales are. Another thing is to use different grammatical structures. So try to use the present passive, future simple and future perfect. So pause here and I'll see you in a bit. Let's have a look at those paragraphs. So I'm not going to read it, but instead I'll just highlight the key things. So we've got past simple here in this second paragraph, as it's talking about 2000 and 2010. And as you can also see, I've got actual figures quoted, and you should have done that too. You really need to get into the habit of doing this, because figures are very, very important when it comes to your task 1. And then in the third paragraph, because it's talking about the future, I've got is projected, so the present passive. Then I've got the future perfect and future simple. Just to recap, make sure you use different vocabulary, make sure you are precise, you use figures from the chart, and you use different future structures. That brings us to the end of the lesson. So before you start writing your report, make sure you ask yourself these 2 questions. What is the time frame? And then what tenses should I be using? And remember, using the wrong tense means that your whole report won't make any sense. So you need to nail this from the get-go. So let's do one last practice. I promise you this is the last one under tenses. So these are the questions that you practiced your introductions on in the previous module. This time, what I want you to do is write down what tense or tenses you should be using for each question. Just the tenses. You can find this on page 30. Let's have a look at the answers. The first one is the past simple. As it's looking at 2 years in the past, that should be enough. The second one is present simple because no year has been mentioned, so we can assume it's in the present. Third one would be past simple again, as it's one particular year in the past. And the last one would be present passive, future simple and future perfect, because it's looking at projections in the future. So that's the end of the first lesson. I will see you in the next one.